We finally have an update to the Fleetwood Mac saga. I got to be honest with you. I know this is one of the biggest bands in the world, and I love them too. But I just the frenzy behind this is unbelievable to me. People are really they're picking sides, man. This has become, I think, the story of 2018 so far about Lindsey Buckingham being replaced in Fleetwood Mac by Neil Finn and Mike Campbell, formerly of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Now, before people get crazy, I just want to preface this with, this wasn't a situation where somebody asked Lindsey, like, hey, what do you think about being fired? And he fired back and said all these things. What happened is, and the audio that you're going to hear, essentially, this is the first time I have publicly seen him since the firing of Fleetwood Mac. Essentially, he was at a fundraiser for a congressional candidate, Mike Levin. He was at a fundraiser for Mike Levin, and he spoke out. And what's interesting is, I mean, essentially, he said that Fleetwood Mac lost perspective, yet he compared what happened to him leaving Fleetwood Mac to what's happening in Washington and America. So, and I'm just saying, I am a huge Fleetwood Mac fan, and I love Lindsey Buckingham, and he certainly is closer to making these assertions than I am. But that being said, I mean, he's literally comparing the United States of America to Fleetwood Mac. So it's a smidge ridiculous. It's a smidge ridiculous. But nonetheless, all kidding aside, it makes total sense because, there's something that's happening to him in his life. And, he feels there's something that's happening in the country right now, and he can draw the parallels between the two. So I just thought it was funny that he used the word specifically perspective and wanted to point that out. So here are his comments. We'll pick it up sort of halfway through him talking about the congressional candidate and his feeling towards that. And then he gets right into the comments on Fleetwood Mac. Again, this is the first time we've heard from Lindsey since his departure from the band.
Cameron, certainly someone that I feel I'm a kindred spirit with. But, this is it's been an interesting time on a lot of levels. For me, personally, probably some of you know that for the last 3 months, I have sadly taken leave of my band of 43 years, Fleetwood Mac. This was not something that was really my doing or my choice. I think what you would say is that there were factions within the band that had lost their perspective.
Stevie Nicks!
Well, it doesn't really matter. The point is that...
I like the girl in the crowd. Man, Stevie Nicks! You see what I'm saying? Like, people are... and I get it. I get it. I get the passion behind it. It's just what it's turned into. To me, people taking side. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. It really is crazy. I don't really know. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not really sure I've seen something like this, a switch over in a band, that has gotten so much attention. So like, when was the last time? I mean, I'd really have to go back and think about the last time. I mean, usually like drummers and things are replaced, people that sometimes people don't even realize. But this is obviously a big part of the band. But still, like, the last time we've had such outcry surrounding something like this is unbelievable. Notice some of the things that Lindsey says, though, and this is part of where I can really contribute here, because my analysis in this, he says, I left my band and it wasn't my choice and it wasn't my doing. I mean, like, the word fired really doesn't want to be used by both him, and we heard Mick speak about this. He didn't want to say the word fired. It's really, really interesting how they tiptoe around this. But again, listen to the words that Lindsey chooses here, and I'm going to wrap it up towards the end, because there's some underlying truths in not only his word choice, but also his tone.
Yeah. Know that for the last 3 months, I have sadly taken leave of my band of 43 years, Fleetwood Mac. This was not something that was was really my doing or my choice. I think what you would say is that there were factions within the band that had lost their perspective.
Stevie Nicks!
Well, it doesn't.
That was Christine, by the way. Christine was in the crowd. She'd have been drinking. We don't know the inside, the whole thing.
Well, it doesn't really matter. The point is that
I can't confirm that was Christine.
That they'd lost their perspective, and what that did was to harm. And this is the only thing I'm really sad about. The rest of it becomes an opportunity, but it harmed the 43-year legacy that we had worked so hard to build. And that legacy was really about rising above difficulties in order to fulfill one's higher truth and one's higher destiny. Now, we also are at a point with our country in Washington where there's been a loss of perspective. But the loss of perspective we see now is indeed threatening to harm the legacy that is the United States. And so, in the context of that, you've got to think of what needs to be done, and it is not going to come from the top down. It is going to come from the ground up, and this is why we are here. And so, I am most honored and most pleased to have been asked in my own small way to help in that pushback, which very, very much needs to happen in order to continue the legacy that we all have come to value. So thank you for having me.
So that was Lindsey. I think he wants you to vote him back into Fleetwood Mac. I think that's what he's asking for. No, but you know what the thing is? Look, he said a lot of interesting things there. He worries about the legacy of the band. He says, and I think quite wonderfully, it's sad. The legacy part of the band is sad, but the rest of it is an opportunity, which to me, you know, if you're a fan of Lindsey, like you gotta be psyched about that, because he's gonna look at this, he's gonna take this as an opportunity. And you know, for me as a fan of just great songwriters, I'm excited as all heck to see what this does to him internally and how he then puts it out. Music, like, can you imagine what the next Lindsey Buckingham album is gonna be like? I mean, all those emotions and feelings in 43 years, and now it's come to an end. Like, I mean, I think is about to unleash maybe some of the best material that he's ever come up with. I mean, you think about the turmoil between him and Stevie that originally created such great music. Like, here it is again, just boiling over in a huge way. I think we're in for a real right hook from Lindsey Buckingham as far as songwriting goes. So I'm looking forward to that. But just the delicate manner in which he handles his word choice, and even in his tone, like, he's upset. Like, there's a guy who's upset. We all know we've all been there. We've all been fired. We've all had somebody break up with us, right? We've all had a relationship of some means come to an end, and it could be very difficult and very hard. But I don't think we're seeing a Lindsey Buckingham that was like, I want to do what I want to do, and to hell with those guys, because there certainly is that groundswell of feeling amongst the fans. I think we're seeing, you know, an unfortunate circumstance play itself out in the public now, which is really unfortunate. But I think you're hearing what is sadness, bitterness, maybe a little bit. You know, the way he says certain factions in the band. You know, you can tell he's got a lot to say. He's angry. He's upset, right? But at the same time, he's respectful to not let too much of it go. And that tells me there's always an instance for a reunion when you start to hear stuff like that. He doesn't want to say fired. Certain factions in the band, someone yells out F Stevie Nicks, and he doesn't take the bait, right? He doesn't go for it. So anger, sadness. Clearly this wasn't, you know, he said it wasn't his choice, but you know, at the same time, you know, he's accepted it. It's unfortunate, but what I see here is someone who just got fired, who's really, really angry about it, and is handling it in the nicest way possible. And by the way, being respectful of the 43-year legacy, because if he wanted to throw it all away, he could have went out there and said Stevie Nicks sticks, and whoever else he's having issues with in the band, that, and, he could have went out there and blew it all up. But clearly, amongst this sadness and unfortunate series of events, you have two groups that are still on different sides that have come to a common ground of they don't want to call the other one out. They don't want to say fired. And I think that they'll eventually find their way back to one another. I really do. I really do believe that. I really think at some point you'll see Fleetwood Mac on stage with Mike Campbell, with Neil Finn, and with Lindsey Buckingham. I think that is absolutely something that we are all going to see. Maybe not in the next year and a half, 2-3 years, but maybe 4 or 5 years down the road. I think that's something that is entirely possible once all these things get out of everybody's system. But again, whatever it is that Lindsey's working on, I think look out, could be amazing, because there's clearly a lot of emotions in this man that he needs to get out. All right, so there's your Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey Buckingham update. First time he speaks out, first time he performs out, and we'll see what comes of this. I'm sure at some point, I have to believe that Lindsey is going to sit down with somebody and actually do press. I would guess whenever it is this material comes to fruition as an album, he's going to sit down, he's going to have to answer these questions, and we'll see how his tone is when that time